Hello, everyone, and welcome back. You are on spring break right now, and I hope you're enjoying the sunshine. I'm just getting ahead a little bit. Thought I would record some of our chapters. And also, while I was cleaning out the basement yesterday, I found this gem right here, found this whiteboard. So I'm really excited about that. I took the information on our card about the different recipients of the letter, the people we don't know who received a letter, and I wrote those up here, so hopefully you can see them. But the first one was just that they are a male and they like to read. And the second one was they are female with long hair and that they travel. The third, I just have female. So if you have more information that I could add to our shared chart, let me know. That'd be great. I will add that in. Also, I'm pretty sure it was Andrew, but I might be wrong. But someone mentioned at our last Zoom meeting that they thought the second person might be Miss Hussey. So I'm going to put Miss Hussey question mark there, so you can add that on yours if you want. Miss Hussey question mark, maybe. All right. So we are going to read chapters 4, 5, and 6. We might have to do that on 2 videos, but we shall see. Let's get started. All right, here we are. I have flipped the screen successfully. Hopefully it doesn't freeze on us today. So we are on chapter 4. That's on page 35, Picasso's Life. Here we go. Miss Hussey had an extra gleam the next morning. Oh, it's still paused. Technical difficulties. Okay, had some technical difficulties. Chapter 4, Picasso's Life. Miss Hussey had an extra gleam the next morning. She agreed that the trip to the museum hadn't exactly worked. They found 3 religious scrolls and the letter with the red seal, but that was it. Miss Hussey said she'd enjoyed the search. She didn't seem upset at all. You know, one of my favorite painters was interested in letters and made them important in a bunch of his paintings. Maybe that's why I thought we'd see more of them. Funny how you can project things. She changed the subject, her voice suddenly businesslike. So, what now? Have we reached any conclusions about communication? Petra raised her hand. Maybe it's hard to study. How about we work on something else to do with art? She liked exploring the Art Institute. She was sure they'd come up with another worthwhile subject to investigate. Denise said, I thought that some of the art was pretty gross. I mean, a lot of it was gory and violent, or fat and naked, or old, boring, just people dressed up. I mean, you couldn't make me live with some of those pictures. There was a murmur of agreement. Denise sniffed happily. She's kind of a snot, isn't she? I doubt you'll need to, Denise, Miss Hussey said evenly, crossing her arms. Then she stood still and looked at the ceiling. When she couldn't move, the room grew quiet. You know, Miss Hussey said finally, Picasso said that art is a lie, but a lie that tells the truth. She was pacing now. Lies in art. It's an ancient problem. So if we work with art, she said slowly, we'll have to figure out something else first. What makes an object a piece of art? Denise rolled her eyes but stayed quiet. Here's what I want you to do. Start by choosing one item at home that feels like a work of art to you. It can be anything. Don't ask anyone for advice. This has to be your own thinking. Describe this object for us without saying what it is. And this time, I won't let you off the hook, she grinned. We'll read some of your ideas aloud. Calder wondered what Picasso had meant. Was it that art wasn't exactly the real world, but it said something real? Okay, so we have an image here. And I was looking at this a little bit ahead of time. And I see art is a lie, is the truth real on the board. And we have Miss Hussey and some other students, and then Calder, right? And he's holding pentominoes, and it's the whole set. And I was wondering if that could be a clue, but the description said that the pentominoes would be hidden. So that doesn't look hidden, it's like right there, really obvious. So, and I also didn't happen to see a frog or another creature in this in this illustration. If you see one, let me know, and I'll add it to my card. You should add it to yours too. All right, page 38. He began thinking up other combinations of art, a lie, and the truth that made sense. It worked almost like the logical arrangements of 5 squares that made up each piece of his pentominoes. How about art is the truth that tells a lie? Maybe all of life was about rearranging a few simple ideas. Calder, smiling at the chalkboard, now squirmed in his chair with excitement at the thought. If he could just get to those simple ideas with a little practice, he'd be a cross between Einstein and the mathematician Ramanujan, or maybe Ben Franklin. Calder? He was twisted sideways in his chair, his arm resting on his head. His pentominoes had somehow gotten onto his desk. He scooped them hurriedly into his pocket, but one fell on the floor. Calder, did you want to say something? It looked like your hand was up, Miss Hussey said. I was just thinking, about what Picasso said, but I'm still thinking, he finished. There was a ripple of unfriendly laughter from the class around him, and Calder could feel the back of his neck getting hot. If only Tommy had been there, he would have elbowed Calder earlier and gotten him back on target. The bell rang. Denise stepped on Calder's pentomino piece just as he reached down to get it. Her knee hit him in the ear. Oops, sorry, I stepped on your toy, she laughed and gave the plastic piece under her foot an extra scuff. It shot under Miss Hussey's desk. Sorry, your feet are so big, Calder had heard Petra muttering behind him. Not sure he'd heard right. He turned to look for Petra, but she was gone. Calder groped around for his pentomino as his teacher erased the board. He wanted to tell Miss Hussey that he'd been thinking about important stuff, but he didn't know how to say it. Miss Hussey turned toward him and smiled. I know, Calder. I get caught up in my own ideas, too. Maybe one day I'll try having us all write down daydreams for a week and see what we come up with. Maybe we'll decide they're a lot more important than what I thought we were supposed to be working on. Calder nodded gratefully. Miss Hussey was the best. He wiped off his pentomino piece. He looked at the T shape. T for what? Trouble? But why trouble? There was nothing at home that felt like a piece of art. Petra considered an embroidered pillow, but it had a big tear in it. She found a silk caterpillar kite, but it had lost one eye. She thought of the stick her mom used to make a bun for her hair, the one with amber on it, but it had been missing for days. What was art anyway? The more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. What made an invented object special? Why were some man-made things pleasing and others not? Why wasn't a regular mixing bowl or spoon or light bulb a piece of art? What made certain objects land in museums and others in the trash? She guessed that most people who went to museums didn't ask that question. They just believed that they were looking at something valuable or beautiful or interesting. They didn't do any hard thinking about it. She wasn't going to be that kind of person, ever. She thought about pictures at the Art Institute that made her feel as if she could leave everything predictable behind. She always felt that way when she stood in front of Calibat's rainy day painting, the wet cobblestones underfoot, the people going places in their long skirts and top hats, an inviting turn off the street. This was art that was an adventure. It let her into another world. It made familiar stuff seem mysterious. It sent her back to her life feeling a little different, at least for a few minutes. She was still thinking about Calibat's Paris Street on her way to the grocery store. If he had painted Harper Avenue, would it have looked just as intriguing? As she approached the corner, she noticed the man with suspenders, the one who had talked to Miss Hussey, step out of the front door of Powell's, look around, and drop a book into a giveaway box outside. She sped up. The book had a cloth cover with several dark stains, and the paper was thick and creamy, soft at the edges. The title jumped out at her, Lo. The illustrations were done in black and white. Distorted, rubbery figures clutched each other or screamed. She read a few paragraphs. By the way, this is a real book, and it's on Google for free. Like if you Google Lo, you can see parts of this book. Terrified horses up on their hind legs, hoofing a storm of frogs, frenzied springboks, capering their exasperations against frogs that were tickling them. Storekeepers in London gaping at frogs that were tapping on their window panes. We shall pick up an existence by its frogs. Wise men have tried other ways. They have tried to understand our state of being by grasping at its stars, or its arts, or its economics. But if there is an underlying oneness of all things, it does not matter where we begin, whether with stars or laws of supply and demand, or frogs, or Napoleon Bonaparte. One measure a circle, beginning anywhere. I have collected 294 records of showers of living things. What? Petra flipped back to the front and saw that the book had been written in 1931 by a man named Charles Fort. She tucked it under her arm. Chapter 5. Worms, Snakes, and Periwinkles. That night, flipping around in Low, Petra was more and more amazed. She had never seen a book like this. It was, first of all, peppered with quotes from journals and newspapers around the world. There was the London Times, the Quebec Daily Mercury, the New Zealand Times, the Woodbury Daily Times, the New York American, the Gentleman's Magazine, the Ceylon Observer. The list went on and on. There were hundreds of stories of bizarre happenings, many of them similar. Venomous snakes dropped into backyards in Oxfordshire, England. Red and brown worms fell with snowflakes in Sweden. Bushels of periwinkles fell from the sky on Cromer Gardens Road outside Worcester, England. Luminous floating lights traveled slowly over open land in North Carolina and in Norfolk, England. Wild animals turned up where they shouldn't have. People disappeared and then were found far away, disoriented and confused. There were crashes and explosions that no one could explain. Fort had apparently spent 27 years going through old newspapers and libraries. He had copied out thousands of articles about unexplained goings-on. It is the profound conviction of most of us that there never has been a shower of living things, but some of us have been educated by surprises out of much that we're absolutely sure of. That's one of your question options this week, is about being educated by surprises. Petra read this twice and turned a few pages. I have never heard of any standard in any religion, philosophy, science, or compilation of household affairs that could not be made to fit any requirement. We fit standards to judgment, or break any law that it pleases us to break. We have conclusions, which are the product of senility, or incompetence, or credulity, and then argue from them to premises. We forget this process and then argue from the premises, thinking we began there. Petra struggled with this language and had to look up the words credulity and premises. Rereading each sentence in pieces, she began to get a grip on what Fort was saying. Depending on how you looked at things, your world could change completely. His thought was that most people bent over backwards to fit everything that happened to them into something they could understand. In other words, people sometimes twisted what was actually in front of them to fit what they thought should be there, never even realizing what they were doing. People like to see what they were supposed to see and find what they were supposed to find. It was quite an idea. And then, see London newspaper, August 18th and 19th, 1921. Innumerable little frogs that appeared during a thunderstorm upon the 17th in the streets of the northern part of London. Farther down. There have been repetitions of these arrivals. There is an account in the London Daily News, September 5th, 1922, of little toads which for 2 days have been dropping from the sky at the Chalon-sur-Saône, France. Could this be true? Why wasn't more time in school spent studying things that were unknown and not understood instead of things that had already been discovered and explained? Miss Hussey always asked for their ideas. Wouldn't it be great to go digging for weird facts like Charles Fort did? To try to piece together a meaning behind events that didn't seem to fit? And why wasn't this book a piece of art? She grabbed her notebook and began to write. This object is hard on the outside and bendable on the inside. It is the color of an unripe raspberry, and it weighs about as much as a pair of blue jeans. It smells like a closet in an old house, and it is ancient shape. It holds things that are hard to believe. There are living creatures falling like rain and objects that float by themselves. People vanish and reappear. It's made of substances that once grew, that once bent in the wind and felt like night air. It is older than trips to the moon or computers or stereo systems or television. Our grandparents might have seen it, knew when they were young. There was a woman's name in faded brown ink in the inside cover. Petra wondered who else had loved this book and why it had ended up outside of Powell's. Why had it been thrown away? She would never lose it, not ever. Before closing the book, she looked again for that one terrific sentence. We shall pick up an existence by its frogs. Hours later, under a silver of moon, Petra was almost asleep. As she rolled over, squashing her pillow into position on top of her arm, a strange thing happened. Although her eyes were closed, she seemed to be looking at a young woman. This person was old-fashioned. She was dressed in a yellow jacket that had dappled fur on the edges, and her hair was pulled back tightly with shiny ribbons. Dangling earrings, perhaps pearls, caught the light. She had been sitting at a table and writing. Something had interrupted her. Quill pen in hand, she had paused to look up. The woman was gazing directly into Petra's eyes. Her expression was knowing, filled with kindness and interest, and she had the look of someone who understood without being told. Petra found herself soaking up every detail of the image. Although the room was dark, light touched the metal fastening of a wooden box, a fold of blue cloth on the table, the curve of the woman's forehead, the creamy lemon of her jacket. This was a calm, deliberate world, a world where dreams were real and each syllable held the light like a pearl. It was a writer's world, and Petra was inside it. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman began to fade from Petra's mind. As this happened, Petra felt recognized, as if this person knew who she, Petra Andely, was. It was a shocking feeling, exhilarating, shivery, true, and somehow inevitable, as if things had already been this way. Wide awake now, Petra thought of Charles Fort. Was he responsible for the woman's visit? Had he brought them together, educated by surprises? Fort understood what Petra had often felt. There's much more to be uncovered about the world than most people think. So we have another image here on page 48. And I'm going to get out my card. So I'm going to write down 48 so I remember it's page 48. I hope I haven't missed any clues yet. Page 48. So I don't know if you have found these, but this sticks out to me right away. This frog right here on her, maybe it's like a fur coat of some sort. So I see one frog. And then for pentomino, I just see this one right here in her coat, right? A P pentomino. I'll put a P right there for P. If you guys see more, make sure you share so I can get them down, try to solve this puzzle. If she had any idea how much more, Petra wouldn't have slept at all that night. Chapter 6, The Geographer's Box. On the day Miss Hussey had given the art assignment, Calder went straight up to his room after school. He sat down at his desk and pulled out his pentominos. The W fit with the Y and the U, and the I slid in agreeable next to the L, and the X was difficult to work into the rectangle, but it might fit here between the P and the U. Pentominos always helped him think. He wrote down the word art. He followed it quickly with RTA, RAT, ATR, TRA. It wasn't what he'd meant to put on his list, but his pencil kind of took charge. He read what he'd written out loud. It was a tongue twister, he noticed with delight, aside from being almost every combination of ART. Calder shook himself back toward the assignment. Was his weird list a piece of art? How about the old-fashioned kind of art, the kind in museums that turned up on postcards and posters in people's kitchens? What kind they'd been talking about in school today? Miss Hussey was always saying, listen to your own thinking. Well, what if he, and not those museum people, was the one to decide what was wonderful to look at? What would he choose? The same stuff that was now famous? Probably not the French lady with the too small dress. Art for him was something puzzling. Yes, something that gave his mind a new idea to spin around. Something that gave him a fresh way of seeing things each time he looked at it. What was he remembering? He crawled under his bed and dragged out a dusty crate filled with green army men. He dug down into the corner and pulled out a small box. Calder held the box carefully in both hands. It was made of dark wood, and the corners were covered in inlaid silver vines. The painting on the top showed a man with a ponytail-length hair leaning over the table. He was dressed in a fancy bathrobe, and his face was turned thoughtfully toward a window. A tool that resembled a compass was held lightly in his right hand. A large roll of paper lay under his right arm. There was a wrinkled oriental rug bunched up on the corner of the table in front of him, and his left hand rested on what appeared to be a book. A globe sat high on the cupboard behind him. His expression looked as though he'd been thinking important thoughts, and something had just in that moment interrupted him. Calder felt a sense of understanding, of sympathy for this man. This was what he felt like when he suddenly had to pay attention in school. Calder had always loved this picture. Reaching for his magnifying glass, he held it over the top of the box. He saw light sparkle from the old glass in the window, and the rug came alive with blues and warm gold tones. On the tall cupboard was written the word mirror. Mirror, mirror. He rolled the word around in his mind. He wished Grandma Ranajana had told him more. He tried to remember exactly what she had given when she had given him the box. He had been too small enough to sit on her lap and play with her reading glasses. He might have been 4 or 5. He could remember her blue velvet rocker, the cracks on her knuckles, her gentle cheeks, the color of dark chocolate. We have another image here. I didn't, off the bat, I don't see a frog or another animal. I was thinking maybe there was a pentomino hidden, in these shadows, but I haven't found one yet. So if you find one, let me know. Grandma Ranajana had loved puzzles and mysteries and would have approved of Miss Hussey. Calder grabbed the box and rushed downstairs. He would take a rainbow bath, as Grandma Ranajana used to call it. On the late afternoons in the fall, the sun came through the leaded glass window in the Palais living room and threw rainbows of wavery rhombi and polygons on the floor, the walls, the backs of chairs and sofas. This parade of soft color traveled slowly up one side of the room and vanished in the corner of the ceiling. Grandma Ranajana always swore that sitting in geometry helped the brain. Calder began to write. The man in my hand looks toward the window, and the light lands on one arm and one cheek and the paper on his table. You know the way paper gets blinding in bright light? Well, this paper almost makes you squint. The colors around him are blue and red and light brown. A scrunched up rug is on the edge of the table between him and me, as if someone tossed it up there when they were cleaning the floor and forgot to put it back. And now for weight and size. This thing is about as heavy as a bag of chocolate chip cookies, or maybe an empty spaghetti sauce jar, or a large t-shirt. It is about as thick as a dictionary and as long as a medium tube of toothpaste. Calder paused, the box in his right hand, and looked at the rainbow floating on the far wall. He realized with a shiver of pleasure that the afternoon light was landing on his body in a way that was similar to the fall of the light in the picture, and he wondered if he also looked like he was thinking. Great thought. He was interrupted by loud voices outside the front window. When he peered out, he saw Miss Hussey and Mr. Watch, his boss from Powell's. What on earth were they doing? And then Calder noticed an old lady sitting on the ground between them. When he opened his front door, Miss Hussey shouted, "Water! Get some water!" By the time he was back with the glass, the old lady was standing. Calder didn't recognize her. Miss Hussey said, "Thanks, Calder. I didn't know you lived right here." She explained what Mr. Watch had just told her. He usually walked Mrs. Sharp to Powell's once a week to pick out some books. Miss Hussey had happened to be just behind them. She'd seen Mrs. Sharp stumble and sink to the curb. Mr. Watch looked embarrassed. Miss Sharp looked irritated. "What would I need water for?" she snapped. "Stupid. These new shoes. A grasshopper couldn't walk in them." Was she calling Miss Hussey stupid? If so, Miss Hussey didn't seem to notice. She offered Mrs. Sharp her arm. Or you could say Sharpay, but I'm going to go with Sharp. Calder went back inside and watched from his front window until he couldn't see the three of them anymore. That evening, Calder got a letter. Ripping it open, he grinned. Who else? All right, so we have a code here, right? And then it keeps going right here. And it reads, he hurried to his room to dig out the pentomino code he'd made for himself and Tommy before his friends left. So you need to, before I keep reading and before you keep reading, we need to pause and we need to decipher this code. So the way that you do this, if you don't want to try to figure it out yourself, it says L1 right here, L1, L:1. So that would be L1 would be C, right? So this is my book, so I'm going to write in it. C, F1 is A, Z1 is L, N1 is D. I'm going to have to guess that this is spelling Calder, right? Let's see if T2 is R. Yep, R. So Calder. So pause this and then hit play once you've decoded it. It takes like good 5-10 minutes. All right. It's important. This gives you important information for the story. Calder decoded the message. Worried, which you need to know why he's worried, so make sure you decoded that message. Worried, he went down to the kitchen to tell his parents the news. Everyone in the Pillay household felt bad. Moving to a new neighborhood was hard enough, but having the kid next door suddenly disappeared seemed like a bad joke. Tommy had never known his real father. During the past winter, his mom, Zelda, who worked at the university library, took a vacation with 2 other women. They went to Bermuda. She came back with a husband. At first, Tommy was very quiet and didn't want to talk about old Fred, as he started calling him. Fred tried hard to be a dad. He played baseball with Tommy in the park. He came to school and met many of the teachers. He took Tommy and Calder to 53rd Street for hot fudge sundaes all the time and let them get any size they wanted. After a while, it seemed like Tommy was starting to like him. And then old Fred announced last July 4th, Calder remembered the date because it took the bang right out of the fireworks, that the family would need to move to New York. He had bought a house in the suburbs without even telling Tommy's mom. And of course, not the kid, Tommy had said when telling Calder. And now this frog business? What kind of name was Frog anyway? Calder wrote Tommy back. So pause the message here and make sure that you take a few minutes to decode this message so you know what's going on. Welcome back. Tommy had always liked spying. Maybe this was an opportunity not to be a mediocre kid. Calder smiled, remembering their conversation in the kitchen when he had first gotten his pentominos. He hoped this message would help. After writing the letter and sealing the envelope, it occurred to Calder that maybe this was bad advice. What if something horrible really had happened to the kid next door? Whoever was responsible wouldn't want another kid snooping around. Calder's parents had told him that the chances of it being a real kidnapping were small. He hoped they were right. And that is the end of chapter 6. Bye, everyone.